There you go. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I am Jeanette Gastad at Tulane University, and I am one of the co-leads for the Park and Green Space Work Group of PAPREN, of which this is. So welcome. Rich is one of the other co-leads. He's here. And Sandy, who I don't think can make it, is the third. There's three co-leads. So oh, let me see the agenda just to go over with everybody. Oh, I didn't see the agenda. Did you put the agenda in the chat, Jem?
I'm having trouble pasting it. Just a second.
Just copy paste. Well, while she's getting that going, I will introduce our speaker that we're so glad to have today. Just a minute. There we go. So Dr. Will Rice, welcome. Thank you for being here today. He's a professor and head of the Wildlife Recreation Management Research Lab at the University of Montana. We'll be talking today about assessing campsite demand and equitable access in U.S. national parks. I think this is really an interesting topic and perfect fit for our group. Dr. Rice holds a Master of Science in Recreation, Park, and Tourism Management and a PhD in Human Dimensions of Natural Resources and the Environment from Penn State University. So he's interested in innovative tools and measures that can be utilized by public land managers to attain sustainable personal and social outcomes in wildland recreation. So thank you for joining us today. We are, again, part of the Physical Activity Policy Research Network, and we're made up of a diversity of backgrounds from research to policy and some organizational folks as well. And, so anyway, we're very interested. And let's see, the agenda is not quite up yet. All right, so anyway, while that's going, Dr. Rice, please take it away. Thank you. Or do we need to share slides or something?
Yes, I'll be sharing slides. Let me see, make sure I can do that. Just a moment. Oops. Yeah, it looks like I can.
Okay, great.
All right. Everyone see that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Is it, do you have, which screen are you seeing? I guess I should ask.
We are seeing your view, your whatever, presenter,
okay,
the presentation view. We don't see your notes, so that's good.
Oh, okay, never mind. Oh,
now we do.
yeah, there we go. Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah, so as Jeanette said, thanks for the introduction, thanks for the invitation. It's really exciting for me to be here. I'll talk a little bit about my lab just to start off, but I realize we only have 20 minutes, so I'm going to move pretty quickly.
You can, we're flexible with that, so
okay.
I don't.
All right, that sounds good.
We just have work group updates, I believe, and I don't know if we have anything from the CDC today, so please feel free to take more time.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, so I'll be talking about two studies in addition to a little bit of what I'm doing here at the University of Montana. Both, one was recently published like last week, the other one was published a little while ago, and I think that's what originally y'all reached out to me about was this study looking at campsite demand, which was really exciting that it got a lot of national traction. So I direct the Wildland Recreation Management Research Lab here at the University of Montana. We're a group of applied social scientists in this same field I think a lot of you all would identify with, just around outdoor recreation research. We do a lot of really applied work for federal land management agencies, state land management agencies, local land management agencies. And we have just kind of this really broad expertise between myself and my grad students across natural sciences, social sciences. We have a lot of professional experience working for land management agencies. Prior to joining the lab, myself coming with a background in the National Park Service and Fish and Wildlife Service, my graduate students came from all kinds of land management agencies, from local to federal. So we bring this really applied lens to everything we do, and everything we do is generally in service to either land management agencies or applied to human health and nature, as I'll talk a little bit about here. So just a little bit of background on some of the other, just to kind of show the breadth of what we do in our lab. These are just a few of the projects that we're working on currently or just wrapped up, really focused on human health. So the first one's funded by the National Park Service, and it's based in Grand Canyon National Park, where we're looking at recreational ecosystem services, which is really the framework I use to frame most of our research in terms of grounding it in theory. And there we're looking at how increased use in the park is leading to potential safety issues, things like zoonotical diseases between, all sorts of mammals living on the canyon edge, but also people falling into the canyon, or heat exposure, potential traffic accidents, all kinds of stuff that could potentially be inhibiting people's experience or potentially limiting the amount of ecosystem services they're able to attain in the park, given a number of variables. Another project we're working on actively is an NIH-funded study here with the Center for Population Health Research on our campus at the University of Montana. And we're using big data, which is sort of I'll just say like kind of half of my research tends to be very applied on the ground, surveying visitors in park settings, and about half of it is very much based in the lab, processing big data sets to help answer questions we haven't been able to answer through those applied surveys in our field. So here we're using 3 big data sets. One, the protected area database for the United States, which has all the protected areas across the US in it, with all sorts of management attributes and physical attributes. And we're pairing that with cell phone location data gathered here in Western Montana of park visitors to understand what are local visitation patterns like to each of these protected areas in Western Montana. And then we're pairing that with a third database, which is healthcare data for adolescents on 5 different health indicators we know that are related to green space use. And we're essentially creating spatial predictive models to try to understand to what extent and at what buffer radius around adolescents in terms of the protected area and green space attributes around what's around them in terms of the amount of protected areas, the character of those protected areas, the visitation patterns of those protected areas, how do those relate to adolescent health? And we're kind of right in the thick of that one right now. And then one we just wrapped up was funded in part by the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics, and that was looking at these new participants who entered outdoor recreation during the COVID-19 pandemic and trying to predict future use, but also looking at people who stopped outdoor recreation due to increased barriers during the pandemic and trying to understand some issues around equity when it comes to outdoor recreation and some of the weaknesses within park and outdoor recreation management that kind of came to bear during the pandemic and how we can move past those into the future. So that's a little bit of the breadth of what we do in this lab. Again, all pretty applied, but across many different scales, from one little park unit or a subunit within a park, one campground within a park, to a huge region like the American West right now. So working at various scales and various issues, but really all in service of understanding how outdoor recreation relates to health, but also relates to just the leisure experience generally for folks primarily here in the US. So today I was asked to talk exclusively about my research around camping. In my field of research, there's been a lot of research done over the last 4 or 5 decades looking at campsite impact, so how campers impact the landscape, and also the wilderness camping experience, people backpacking. But today I'm going to be talking about something that's received relatively and kind of surprisingly less research, which is campground camping, which is defined by the National Park Service in this way, where people go to an established campsite primarily made of loops and what we call the Meineke model. And each loop has numerous campsites, something like you see here in the background in a picture from Everglades National Park, kind of the clover leaf structure of campgrounds that we're used to seeing that are really popular in national parks. And as I mentioned, surprisingly, given how many Americans camp, how many people in North America camp, frankly, and how big of an industry it is, and I'll talk about that in a moment, Campgrounds are largely forgotten recreation resources in the research literature. We focus so much on backcountry camping and hiking and campsite impacts that looking at these front country campgrounds, which are used by a huge swath of the American public, have been largely overlooked. And that's surprising because camping is a really big deal in North America and in the US. 67% of North Americans camped at least occasionally in 2021. During the pandemic, first-time participation grew by 5 times in 2020 as people saw it as a safer way to enjoy the natural environment, to experience leisure, to socialize, to travel. And just for a little bit of reference, not that dollars are everything by any means, but camping is a $241 billion industry in the United States compared to, for instance, US museums, it's a $62 billion industry, just to kind of give you or excuse me, in terms of, I guess not industry, but in terms of annual economic impact, it's a pretty major, in terms of outdoor recreation, it's hard to compete with the economic impact that camping has. And as someone who studies outdoor recreation, one thing that really draws me to camping is the fact that there's so many issues that we're facing in outdoor recreation around representation and equitable access, but camping and fishing actually are two that we really see as a bright spot historically, where white folks don't tend to be overrepresented. Non-white folks don't tend to be underrepresented generally. Camping as a whole, here we're just talking about the activity as a whole, not within state parks, national parks, whatever. It's generally, the data tells us that it's pretty representative. And what we also know is that of non-participants who are currently experiencing barriers or not participating, camping tends to be, especially for lower income groups, either the first or second the activity they would most like to or most see themselves participating in the future, along with fishing. And as we're all really well aware, in this time of year, this really seems to come up if you're trying to reserve campgrounds for the summer, campsites for the summer. Camping's really blowing up. We're seeing articles like this. My grad student just sent me an article this morning about campsite reservations and how difficult they're getting those from outside. This is an article from last year, but it's really difficult to find these campsites right now. And so land managers are certainly feeling this crunch. Campsite administrators, national park superintendents are trying to figure out how do we allocate these campsites under such demand. There's a call for adding more campsites, which has its own issues around impact. But we're certainly experiencing this, what the Guardian called the boom in camping in the US, especially as we're still grappling with COVID-19. And this quote, I think, really summarizes that really well. And I love this quote because it's coming directly from the agencies. It's coming from recreation.gov, which is administered by the federal land management agencies here in the United States. And in their newsletter, this is just their May newsletter from 2021, they have the following quote: "A popular campground with 57 campsites can see close to 19,000 people all trying to reserve the same campsites for the same dates immediately after their release for reservation." So if you do the math on that, that's a 0.3% chance of getting a campsite. And when the chances of getting a campsite are that low, you can imagine that any little marginal advantage you can have really stacks up. So, and those add up really quickly. So if you have, fractionally, marginally better internet speeds than someone else, you're more likely to get the campsite. If you have more friends who are all trying to book it at the same time, so if you have a really extensive social network in outdoor recreation, that's going to be advantageous. If you have more institutional knowledge, like when exactly the campsites are released, that's going to be helpful. There's so many things that add up. Leisure time, just being able to have the free time at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday to go on and try to reserve your campsite for 6 months in advance. The planning horizon is obviously a really big issue as well. But this just really paints it, and I think because it's coming from the agency, it's pretty stark. And so the first study I'm going to be presenting is really trying to understand this demand a little bit better. So I worked with my colleague So Young Park at Florida Atlantic University on this study. This was published, oh man, maybe a little over a year ago. And this was really just to understand, how are people picking campsites? Historically, in my field of research, people have been using these kind of models like you're seeing here on the right, these decision models to understand how people pick campsites. And there's been a lot of these proposed over the years. But most of this research relies on stated choices. So asking people in a campsite, like, how did you pick this campsite? And then trying to kind of decipher exactly how the decision making worked. And we decided, both So Young and I, coming from at least some economics training, we were like, it'd be really interesting if we could find some revealed preference data to unravel this a little bit. So look at recreation as actual behavior, not just their observed behavior and how they pick a campsite. So we were really interested across the three aspects of the recreation setting, which are the managerial, social, and ecological. What aspects of the setting are most influential in people choosing one campsite over another? And how can we explore that with revealed preference data? And we did this in Watchman Campground in Zion National Park, which is one of the most highly demanded campgrounds in the US. It has a 6-month booking window, so that kind of gets to little foreshadow some of the issues around equity I'll talk about later. But you have to be able to plan 6 months in advance in order to have the confidence to book a campsite. And it's interesting too, because it offers a lot of natural and managerial amenities. It's a fully developed campground, also has a canyon wall on one side, which is very pretty. And then it's on the other side, it's bordered by the Virgin River. And you can see a mock-up of it here with the Virgin River going down. This map's upside down. So this, I guess, is the western edge, and the eastern edge being the canyon wall. And in terms of understanding the revealed preference demand, we use the Recreation Information Database. And some of you may be familiar with this. If not, it's a really awesome tool for researchers like ourselves to dive into. The RIDB, Recreation Information Database, contains reservation data for every campsite or tour or river permit, or now even entry permit to some national parks that are reserved through recreation.gov. And so, for instance, in 2019, with the data set we were using, we had data for all 24,000 plus reservations made at Watchman Campground, which gives us just a massive scale of data. And we can understand when the reservation was made, for what data was made for, the zip code, where people are coming from, how much they paid for their campsite. All of that is stored in this database. And so using that data, we created our dependent variable, which was the booking window, which is kind of a nice proxy for demand we can get from the hospitality literature, saying, well, the campsite that's booked first on average is probably the most demanded campsite versus the one that's booked last. On average is generally the least demanded. And so we created this spatial regression model that had campsite as the unit of analysis, and then the dependent variable was just how far in advance were these campsites booked on average. And then we've used all sorts of aspects that we can measure spatially in terms of proximity, or just kind of yes, no, like does it have direct access to the river? And a lot of this we were able to get actually just from recreation.gov. They have all sorts of awesome filtering tools, like does it have a fire pit? Does it have a picnic table? I just want campsites that are along the river. And then some of the variables we looked at to see if they'd have an impact on demand were things like, from the pictures on rec.gov, can you actually see the canyon wall? So do you have this view shed of the canyon wall? They also had data like you could select by whether it was shaded or not shaded. And really, we only wanted to look at attributes that might impact demand that were readily discernible to campers that would be browsing rec.gov. So we didn't want to think about things that you would only know if you were on the ground, because obviously most people aren't booking with that deep knowledge of, okay, I know exactly, this campsite has its picnic table is really nice, or this one isn't as nice. Those are really hard to tell from just the visuals from the few photos that are uploaded. And so I'm not going to go too deep into the methods. I'm happy to talk about this a little bit. We use Xi and Zhu's 4 steps to spatial regression in running these models, and came up with a spatial lag model that fit our data really well. And you can see here, these are the attributes, the aspects of the setting that really significantly influenced demand based on our regression results. So whether or not the campsite was a walk-in site, the price of the campsite, which was directly correlated with whether the campsite had private access to electricity. So you're paying a small premium in order to have access to electricity. And then whether or not the campsite had direct access to the Virgin River. And what's interesting is, some of these are positively, one of these is positively correlated, the price of campsite, meaning essentially this tells us that people who want electricity, like those campsites that have electricity are really highly demanded. And we have this inverse relationship between price and demand. Normally, the lower price item has higher demand, but here as price increases, as does demand, but really that's a function of just having access to electricity, which is highly prized, especially among RV campers. People do not want to walk into campsites. Those are the least demanded. And then access to the Virgin River is also negatively related, significantly so, to access. And that was really befuddling. At face value, it's like, well, wouldn't you want to camp next to the river? However, we found that that access along the river is not as favorable here. And here's actually a little screenshot from rec.gov saying, like warning people that there's a toxic cyanobacteria bloom in the river. And so please be aware. So people are largely trying to stay away from the river in this instance, given this messaging, which was really interesting and not what we would expect in other ways. But certainly this messaging was working in some ways because people didn't want to camp near the river. And so just some key results here. Essentially those walk-in campsites had booking windows if a campsite was a walk-in campsite, we would expect decreases in booking window nearly 12 days. Direct access to the Virgin River decreased average booking window by 8 days for every $1 increase in price. And again, like that price being directly related to whether or not it had access to electricity, prices increased, or booking windows increased by approximately 1 day for every $1 increase in price. And here we see some people in the Virgin River, despite the cyanobacteria blooms, which there's been a lot in the news recently, which is also just a really interesting aspect from a public health standpoint, because a dog died in the river, and there's a lot going on there. And so here's just a map, just to kind of wrap this one up quickly. Here's just a map of kind of our findings, where you can see demand based on this color spectrum from 51 days to 142 days. We're able to see which ones are most demanded. And so we're able to tell, in some ways, this is really helpful for management because they can understand what aspects do people care about. One thing that we were really surprised by is that proximity to neighbors was not significant. So, if you're at a campsite that's surrounded by others or really close to others, like you can see here, these two are almost on top of each other down in this southwest corner, didn't significantly impact demand. And these walk-in sites are pretty spread out, but didn't impact demand positively in terms of that. We also thought a lot of the inspiration for this study came out of kind of just my own personal curiosity around choosing a campsite is this. And I think this research got a lot of press coverage. And I think a lot of the reason was this is a very common experience among outdoor recreationists, which campers are a huge portion of the American public. How close do you camp to the bathroom? It's kind of an age-old question to some extent. And diving into the previous literature, there was people were going both ways. You want to be close enough that if you need to go in the middle of the night, it's there. But you also want to be far away enough that you're not smelling it or listening to the door slam all night. So it's kind of this interesting, delicate balance around bathrooms, which is interesting. So in the paper, we talk a lot about the management implications as well. All right. So the second study, this again was just published last week or 2 weeks ago, I guess now. And it's looking at how we allocate these campsites through recreation.gov and its implications in terms of equity around exclusionary unintended consequences of these allocation systems through reservations. And this really rose out of just concern about as more and more, especially during the COVID pandemic, more and more campsites were pushed to recreation.gov. And we saw the crazy demand for these campsites. And all of, I said from the beginning, all of those little factors that could influence whether or not you get that campsite in this market of just incredible demand. What are some of the impacts around equity and exclusion? And so down in the literature, we found very little. There's this technical report from the US Forest Service in 1976 that looked at this problem among California's federally managed campgrounds. And what was interesting is they found only 34% of campers in California had jobs that allowed them to plan 12 weeks in advance. And now we're talking about 6-month booking windows. So obviously that's just one component of these online reservation systems as opposed to first come, first serve that can prove exclusionary. And then I was also really inspired by this book. I highly recommend it, by Dr. Phoebe Young at University of Colorado, who dove into kind of the exclusionary nature of campgrounds in the US, especially within the National Park Service, talked about how early designs, especially as we move towards that campground loop model of campground management, how those were in a post-World War II era meant to emulate suburbs, and we're actually putting up shrubberies and all kinds of things to make white people feel really at home and make those places really feel like white spaces. And how camping really emerged as this leisure class activity as a way to escape urban stresses. And then whenever people, the working class, really started to embrace camping as a nation, the leisure class really pushed back and tried to reappropriate camping as this way to express their affluency. So it's a really excellent book that really dives into some of these, the historical roots of the issues I'll be talking about today. The data we do have tells us that camping remains really exclusionary in national parks. For instance, campers in US national parks on average, this is from RIDBY data actually, have a median household income $4,000 higher on average than the larger US population. And the rise of startups that can help book or alert customers immediately once a campsite has been reserved for a premium like CampNav, you can get a $10 subscription per month, and you can say, I want to know as soon as a campsite becomes available due to a cancellation, or when campsites open up for this park, I'll get an email, alert or a push notification saying like, hey, go book this campsite right now. But you have to have you have to pay a premium for that, which raised concerns around equity. And so our research questions are really like, how do these campsites requiring reservations differ in terms of their demographics from those in the same campgrounds that have the same exact amenities that are available on a first come, first serve basis. And so we're interested to see, do they have higher median household incomes than those not accepting reservations? And do the people who are coming to those campgrounds come from home locales that have larger portions of white residency than those not accepting reservations? And in order to measure this, we used mobile phone location data from a vendor called Near, formerly Uber Media. And they have basically a panel of 30% of US mobile phone users that gathers location data. It's fully anonymized from apps. So if you have your weather app on your phone and it has your location enabled, you have that going on in the background, it'll be sharing its location with this vendor pretty frequently, or ads on mobile phone browsers. So in terms of actually picking campsites to study, this became very important because we needed campsites that had really good cell phone service, and not just cell phone service by one carrier, but at least 3 of the 4 major carriers, so that we knew that we weren't having any sort of income discrepancy, because like Cricket Wireless, for instance, is significantly cheaper than Verizon. So we wanted to make sure we had really good coverage across the board when we were picking our campsites. And so essentially we looked at people who were camping in campsites, in campgrounds that had both loops requiring reservations and loops available on a first come, first serve basis. And then we looked at the common eating locations of the people who are camping in those respective loops to see where are they coming from. And from that, we can draw on their demographics based on their census blocks. And this has been done, it's a really emerging technique in tourism and recreation research. And I can talk more about that later if you'd like to. So again, we looked at the median household incomes of those campers based on their home location and the portion of white residency within the census block group that they were coming from, to determine generally what are the demographics of the people's home locales camping in these different loops. So we looked at 5 campgrounds across the US. Took a lot of exploring to find 5 that really met this experimental design. So again, they had to have really good cell phone coverage. They also had to have, in 2019, they had to have some sites available on a first come first serve basis that were within some loops, some sites in different loops, or different loops that had sites available on a that only accepted reservations. And then we beyond that, we had to look at the campsites themselves to make sure the ones available first come first serve versus only through reservation had the exact same amenities. So and this was kind of drawn on that previous study presented where we knew that amenities had a pretty big influence on demand. And they range from really urban proximate to pretty far away from any urban center. Yeah. And so here's just some of the results. We ran ANOVAs to really look at significant differences among incomes, first of all, of their home locales, where people are coming from. And we found across all the campsites, we saw those who were camping in sites requiring reservations had higher median household incomes on average. And in 3 of those sites, that was a significant difference. So ranging from a non-significant number that's still higher of almost $2,000 to something, $6,300 difference in terms of household income. And these are people camping in the same campground at the same time. Just some of them are camping in these first come first serve loops. Some of them are camping in these reservation only loops. And so we're seeing this exclusionary effect or the potential for exclusion based on income, or at least at base value, significant differences in income based on how people reserve their campsite, which was really fascinating. In an urban proximate setting, Oak Ridge Campground in Prince William Forest Park, which is just outside of Washington, D.C., we saw that a significant difference in terms of the portion of white residency or people's home locales, where those who were camping in campsites requiring reservations came from home locales that were on average had white residency 7% higher than others, in terms of like the proportion of white residency was 7% higher. So big picture, this suggests that as we're moving more and more campsites onto recreation.gov, just as a kind of a side note, we did this with 2019 data. If we were to do the same study in 2020, we'd have to pick different campgrounds because 3 of the 5 campgrounds are now either available almost exclusively or exclusively on a reservation only basis. These first come first serve campsites are really being, we're seeing a huge decrease across the board in this way. And so this speaks to structural barriers in terms of reserving these reservation only campsites. And it really juxtaposes the democratic nature of the national park idea and provisioning these public goods. Again, these are being administered by the National Park Service. This isn't a private entity administering these campsites in the national parks. And it speaks to this kind of reverse trend, whereas we're seeing camping, as I mentioned in the beginning, becoming more racially diverse and economically diverse across the US in national parks. It seems that camping could be becoming more exclusive as more and more of these campsites move to reservation only. And so just a couple takeaways from the larger presentation here. Campgrounds, in terms of recreation, they're used by a huge swath of the American public, but they've received very little in terms of empirical research compared to other forms of recreation or other industries. And using big data, we're actually able to really tap into these data sets, whether that's the reservation data, or if it's the near mobile phone location data. We're able to dive into these and really see, using revealed data, gain insights into one, either that's the demand for these campsites or the exclusionary nature of the allocation system used to manage that demand. So with that, I'll stop and take some questions. I did want to recognize my co-authors on this. Dr. Selyoung Park from Florida Atlantic University was my co-author on the first study, and then Jacqueline Rushing, Dr. Jennifer Thompson, and Peter Whitney here at the University of Montana were my co-authors in the second study I presented. And the mobile phone location data was supported by the following grant for the National Institutes of Health. With that, I'll stop sharing my screen and happy to take any questions if we have time for that.
Yes, yeah, we do have time for that. Thank you very much. That was really, really interesting. I was keeping track of all these different comments and questions I had here myself, but let's get to a few of the questions we had in the chat first here. Jeanette was actually asking, so with electricity, does that mean they are bringing RVs? I think I'm referring to those specific sites that had electricity and specific campsite amenities.
Yeah, it could be. It's definitely not required. So some people, like, for instance, like, I don't know, if you drive through these loops, someone who spends a lot of time on the ground researching in national parks, like, you'll see campers who just have, they want a place to plug in their smartphone for the night, or so yeah, not exclusively RV use, certainly not mandated RV use in that sense. But yes, largely I would say probably RVers.
Yeah, because that's definitely a economic status that's different from people without RVs. It takes a lot more means to support and to operate that. And I just didn't know. I mean, I've been camping, but again, with the Scouts, we're just pitching a tent, and we're not plugging anything in. And so I just was wondering if that meant, and we saw a lot of RVs, like we were the only ones just pitching a tent on our spot. Everybody else had RVs or something.
Yeah. And most of the campgrounds in the second study did not have any electricity, just because that's kind of how it shook out in order to make sure we had reservation only and first come first served campgrounds basically having the exact same attributes. Electricity, most of them didn't offer electricity. They were mostly just, and most of them are tent only campgrounds as well, or tent only, or you could pull in your camper van and sleep in that for the night, but you're not going to get your 35-foot RV in there.
Excellent. I think Terry Horton had the next question here in the chat regarding crowding. And can you determine whether groups or extended families preferentially select close sites?
Oh, that would be interesting. I think we would have to make some inferences based on home zip code with the recreation.gov data or the common email location data. Yeah, we haven't explored that, but I think that's something you could look into.
Excellent. And then Terry, you also had a question too. How does camping in national parks compare to camping in national forests?
Yeah, I just presented some of this research at here in where we're at in the US. We're part of the Crown region, the Crown of the Continent. So I was presenting to land managers that are in that region, both in Montana, but also in Alberta and British Columbia. And that was a question that came up when I presented this there. They were like, man, it'd be really interesting to see like how the demographics of users camping in Glacier National Park versus the national forest just outside Glacier National Park differ in terms of their demographics, and demand differs. And I was happy to tell them I'm working with some graduate students and a colleague at UC Santa Barbara right now, and they're developing this web app that hopefully will be rolled out by the end of the spring here, where you can look at any campground or any region. So you can look at like the state of Montana and look at what are the average demographics for people camping in these campsites based on the RIDBY data, and also the average demand for US Forest Service campsites versus national park campsites. So we don't have that up and running. It's still in a prototype mode. We're starting it just in the state of California and then expand the whole US. But eventually, like, anyone will be able to go into that web app and pull that data and see how that demand differs across agencies, and also what the demographics of campers differ across those agencies, which I think will unlock a whole lot of other research questions to really dive in and explore.
Excellent. And then Jeanette had the last question in the chat, which was, how was the group profile data presented at the beginning collected?
The group profile data.
Oh, the one that you were saying that there didn't appear to be any equity differences in who was camping.
Oh yeah, that is that is a national panel study done by, I think, I'm not sure if that was done by Campgrounds of America or the Outdoor Industry Association, but that's collected, I think, through like a national Qualtrics panel that's representative of the American public.
So
US
it's actual
residents.
people reporting that they camped or not.
Exactly, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So that seems, I mean, that was really interesting. I didn't, that I had never heard that. I mean, that was interesting data you presented that. And then what you're presenting is that the system sort of inhibits, so maybe, but yeah, so I'm just like, so are there issues with equity or not?
Well, I think there are, like, in national park settings and potentially in other settings that haven't been explored.
Oh, because that data, the first data was anybody, any camping.
That's camping in
Okay.
state parks, that's camping
Okay.
in private campgrounds, that's camping in
Okay.
county parks, that's camping in your backyard, that's like camping generally. Versus whenever we zoom in on one subset of campgrounds across the US, the data suggests that those,
Gotcha.
well, and like I said, that wall study from 2018 that looked across all national park campgrounds that are on recreation.gov, that's the one that found that really, they were the first ones to kind of sound the whistle, like, hey, this is really bucking the curve nationally. While, you know, we see this as a bright spot where camping seems to be pretty representative, and like there seems to be potentially less barriers than other forms of outdoor recreation. In national parks, we're not seeing the same trends, and that sort of popped the question, like, well, why? Like, what are some of those barriers?
Cool. Yeah, thanks.
Excellent. I see Krista, you have your hand raised. You have a comment, question?
I do. Hi, everyone. I'm going to try turning my camera on, but if my computer starts to slow down, I may have to turn it off. But I'm Krista Sherwood with the National Park Service. Just wanted to say thank you so much for allowing us to be here to hear this great presentation. Thank you, Will, for doing this research and presenting this information. So a couple of things. I'm definitely interested in, seeing how we can work together on doing more research and determining that equity question related to outdoor recreation and National Park Service. So I would be willing to explore that with this group, or any recommendations. Obviously I'm new to this group, just recently found out about y'all in this presentation, so would love to explore that. And Will, I don't know, would you be willing to come present to National Park Service staff? Our office, I'm the National Program Manager for our Office of Outdoor Recreation for the National Park Service. I work in Washington, D.C., and we provide policy and guidance to staff and our national parks across the country. We also facilitate this network of outdoor recreation professionals, and I was wondering if you would be willing to come present to this group. We try to host a community hour once a month to focus on various topics, and this would be really great. And I would love if you would be interested to come present this to them.
Yeah, I'd love to. And like, I think one of the things I didn't really get into today is like our recommendations. We have those in the paper, and I can follow up. I think I shared them with Jem. I shared the actual papers, but we do get into recommendations. We're not just like pointing out the problem, right? Like we're like, hey, there's like some really cool stuff happening in national parks. Like Yosemite's piloting some really cool stuff this summer to try to tackle some of these issues of equity, and so is Yellowstone. And like, there's cool stuff happening that's really that it'd be really exciting to follow some of these pilots of different ways of allocating these campsites in more equitable ways. So yeah, I'd love to talk more, Krista.
Hey, Jem, make sure to distribute those papers with the recording when that goes out, if you would, please. Thanks.
Yes, I'll do that. Thanks, Dr.
That would be great. Will, I can put my email address in the chat?
Yeah,
if you
that'd be
wanna-
great.
Okay.
I'll shoot you an email.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone. I appreciate this.
Anyone else have any questions?
I did, if no else does, I guess I have a lot of questions, sorry.
Go ahead. Jeanette.
So you had mentioned, well, impact to the environment or impact of, and is that one of the, so is it, what are the top questions you say that, camping is so popular, so many people are doing it, it's really increasing. What are the top questions that you see that are needing to be explored? And, is there something particularly that you might say that this group might be, beneficial to address?
Yeah. I guess with like my limited knowledge of, I'm not super familiar with your group. I'm like super interested.
Should
I think-
join. Now you're going to be on our listserv, I think, Jen.
That's
Put us on
great.
the list.
Yeah, I'd love to be. Absolutely. I think there'd be really interesting questions around, a lot of this points to issues around environmental justice and like just access to outdoor recreation, which is where like that study I kind of glossed over at the beginning that we're doing with NIH, like that's looking really at like, how does your access to recreational amenities, not just green space, but actually green space that's supporting recreational visitation, how is that influencing adolescent health, right? And this is a pretty natural connection to this research in that, how is your access to just this activity that is it's like, always it's number 3 in the top 3, depending on where you look in terms of popular outdoor recreation activities across the country. How is access to camping, which we know has like really positive influences on health and especially mental health and family social health, like how is that manifesting? How are some of these barriers potentially leading to issues around environmental justice, to these positive benefits we can get from the environment? I think so much of like, the environmental justice research specifically is looked at, impacts to negative impacts to health or negative impacts to health. But there's also these positive things we can get through outdoor recreation in protected areas that also really demand to be looked at as well. And I think that's this kind of this hints at those larger issues that are out there in that direction.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
See, Jeanette, should we move to project updates?
Yeah, I
or-
suppose we should. Will, thank you so much.
Yeah,
If people want to follow up, do you want to put your contact?
I'll put my email in the chat here.
That's great. And yeah, please, you're welcome to stay on. We're going to do some updates as we can. I don't know if we have updates on everything. But yeah, please.
I got to jump off, but yeah,
okay.
please reach out, and please put me on the email list, or I'd love to join in the future.
All right. Well, thank you. And thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, great.
you.
All right, thanks everyone. Bye.
All right, Jen, what's next on our list?
It's going to be the updates on our projects. I believe Dr. J. Matt wouldn't be, he wasn't able to join due to scheduling conflict, but he was able to provide me some updates on the Nature Measures project. So one of the articles actually published at BMC Psychology, and the other one, the development of validation of attitudes towards spending time in nature skill, was revised and resubmitted to Echo Psychology. So that's for the Nature Measures project.
Yeah, making some great progress. That's great. Thank you. And Terry, did you want to give an update on your project? Since you're here.
Sure. So this is a survey we've been planning for a couple of years, and it's just taken a long time to get it going. And we are close to being ready to launch. We did a test. Okay, so what we're looking at is some of these issues of equity and access to green space. Following COVID and what some of the barriers are, we used a health belief model to provide the theoretical framework for this. We did a test launch back in January, realized that the survey works, but that since we were referencing how much activity have you had in the last month, that releasing the full survey in January when it was cold and everybody was hunkered down was not a really good idea. So, and the other thing we discovered with that test launch was that it's going to cost us about half the amount that we had planned to administer the survey. So we're increasing our sample size. So I'm in the process of adding additional zip codes and places to sample so we can increase the sample size. And now it's just, we're essentially ready to launch. It's a matter of waiting for the weather to get good. And I was interested to hear everybody commenting about how good the weather is in their parts of the country, because Courtney and I were talking earlier this morning about how those of us here in the Midwest are shivering because it's unseasonably cold. And so since the survey asks people to reflect on their activity for the past month, we're hesitating, do we want to release it in the first part of April, or do we want to release it in the first part of May so that people are reflecting on April? We're kind of thinking probably the early part of May so that they're reflecting on April to try to hit the sweet spot before the West Coast goes up in flames and
And the South.
yeah, and the South, right. And the South goes up in tornadoes. So it's like, but we also decided that, that's going to be an interesting part of the manuscript. Is where's the sweet spot for getting good weather? Any advice I'll take.
Oh, that sounds like a reasonable decision. Let us know if you need help distributing through our listserv or whatever.
Yeah, actually, the thing we're doing with the survey is we're pairing it with a survey that has been done by one of my colleagues in sociology, and she started it back in 2020, right after the pandemic started, and she released it through a commercial survey firm. And so what we're doing is going back and resurveying the people who are part of that survey. And so we'll have some information from people as back as early as 2020. So thanks for the help for the suggestion of releasing it, but we're going to try to, at this point, focus on that cohort, those people who've already been surveyed, so we can kind of track their changes in attitudes over the last 2 years. However, in the future, it may be worthwhile and interesting to release this survey, with partners for different targeted audiences. And so we'll see how all of this works. And once we get some data and can look at it, we can think about how to use this in future.
It's great that you found out a cost savings, that you weren't spending as much as you needed or you could have. That's odd too. Usually,
yeah. Well, we were estimating that it was going to take 45 minutes or so for people to do the survey, and when we released it for the test of 100, they were only taking about 20 minutes or so. So we're going to save some money and can increase it.
Good, yeah. All right. I don't know. Jem, if you had any updates on the other projects?
That's all I have for the nature measures project. I think the other one would be the park prescriptions project. The last time I checked with them, we sent out the Qualtrics survey, which you read as the participant listserv, and received 50 responses, and data from preliminary survey was sent out for the IRP application. So that was
with Carissa, right? Carissa, you had told us that update. I don't, Rich, do you remember? Oh, I don't know if you were on that. If you remember the next step on that.
I don't myself, but yeah, Carissa, if you're on the call.
Sure. I think we were trying to convene and determine if we thought that sample size was large enough and if we wanted to, send any more reminders, and which may just be determined by whatever our analysis plan might be, to see what we want to try and run. We might, if we want to do, of course, a little bit more simple stuff, we might be just fine. Or if we want to get a little more advanced, we might need more. So I thought that's about where we were on things.
All right, so great. Then we'll need to set up another meeting and we'll follow up and do that and reconvene to talk. I think Courtney was part of that, right? And then Christina, Carissa, myself, I can't remember if Natasha or Terry were part of that. I think so.
I wasn't, but I just wanted to introduce myself. It seems like you guys are, so you all know each other. I'm Natasha. I'm from Safe Routes Partnership, and this is my first time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, obviously we have these little groups going up with these different projects that people are updating on. And so Jay's paper is done, but these other two projects still need some work. So I don't know if there's opportunities to join in. Definitely with the prescription one, there's we're not very, we're still making decisions and we don't know where we are exactly. So there's opportunity to join any of these little sub projects. So would welcome, your input if you so desire. So thanks. Welcome, by the way. Thanks for joining.
Thanks.
What do you do?
Yeah, I'll give like a little bit of like just an intro. I know we have like 2 minutes left. So Safe Routes Partnership is an active transportation organization. I do primarily like programming around safe routes to parks for people walking and biking. Right now, we just launched a new sort of like research year in order to launch into like some pilot programming. So we're looking at ways that states and regions can align their planning and funding processes to support safer, more equitable and convenient walking and biking to local park and like nature experiences in general. And so we're sort of creating a menu of promising interventions that we're going to pilot in years 2 and 3. And so like, we're looking at like, okay, research questions, like what should we be looking for? But right now we're like creating a menu.
Well, that's great. It sounds like your work fits in perfect to what our group members would be very interested in.
Perfect.
And perhaps would even spark some research ideas that we could work together on. So.
Definitely. Yeah. I think that's why I'm joining. I just kind of want to meet people, see what you guys are working on, and see how I can help, see how we can work together. So happy to be here.
Oh, very cool. Welcome. Thank you. Let's see. And then Sandy's paper project, COVID state orders and park visits and mental health. She all of a sudden couldn't be here, so I guess she'll update us. I know she was doing some analysis and had some data. I know they had done all the coding, but I don't know where they are after that. I don't know if anyone else knows anything about that. Okay. All right. What is next? Jem, you want to take us through the rest of the in our remaining minute? Less than a minute.
Yeah, so any feedback for upcoming meetings, if the schedule still works for everybody else, 11 a.m. CT and last Monday of the month, every alternating month. So
did you say we had a speaker coming up for May?
yes, so that would be Dr. Rocco from the Campus RX Health Network. So meeting details will be released soon.
The what?
The meeting details.
Okay. All right. So we'll be, so save the date for the last, what's the date on that one? End of
That
May?
is going to be month of May, and that's going to be May 30th.
May 30th. All right. So we'll have that. It'll be interesting too, because a lot of us are affiliated with campuses. So we'll get that experience information. All right. Well, it is time. Oh, it's over time. I'm sorry about that. Thank you, everybody. We'll get follow up on meetings. And if you want any more information, please reach out. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.